This move, as you may have remembered, provoked cries by the Democrats and sort of the more progressive wings of the Democratic Party to pack the court, to urge Joe Biden to take some kind of action to reclaim those 2 seats that the Democrats believe had been stolen, Merrick Garland and Ruth Bader Ginsburg's seat. Biden, in his typical Biden way, listened, but agreed only to form a bipartisan commission to study the prospect of reforming the Supreme Court of the United States. He made that announcement by executive order on April 9th, 2021. Again, I was invited to submit testimony to this court commission. And I want to read to you what I argued once again in my testimony to the court commission. I argued that the commission should take an approach that satisfies the calls from the left for a more proportional response to the Republican Party's escalating constitutional warfare, but one that would still put us on a path towards de-escalation and regularizing Supreme Court opinions. What I argued is introducing 4 or 6 new term-limited seats to the Supreme Court via congressional statute could achieve the long-term goals of de-escalation, while in the short term, providing restitution or restorative justice for those on the left who believe that the Republicans effectively stole 2 seats from the Democrats. As I noted, other scholars have provided testimony as to what that would look like operationally, so I won't rehash their recommendeds here. And here was my closing. I'll simply close by saying that maintaining the status quo is not an option, in my opinion. It will only lead to more escalation, more constitutional hardball, and exacerbate our current condition of political and constitutional rot. President Biden and the Democratic majority in Congress have the power, and I would add the responsibility, to put our constitutional democracy on a different path. Well, 294 pages later, and 6 months in December 2021, the Court Commission released a report in which they vigorously argued to maintain the status quo. A report, by the way, which didn't contain a single citation to my testimony, but I was given a full printed out copy as a lovely parting gift for my testimony to the Biden Court Commission. So that's where the Biden Commission is now. And that's where the Biden administration is now with regards to court reform. In the meantime, the 6-justice conservative supermajority is wasting no time flexing their muscles from the marble temple. If you paid attention to the court just these last 2 terms, you know that they have taken up a major case on abortion that has the real prospect, if not overruling Roe versus Wade, seriously gutting it. So it's a right in name only. They've taken up a case on the Second Amendment and gun rights, right? Likely to expand that right and make it very difficult for states and the federal government to regulate. They've just announced they're going to take up affirmative action in October. They've handed down multiple rulings that have expanded the scope of religious liberty as a way to cut against not only COVID regulations, public health and safety regulations, but LGBTQ rights. They just announced they're hearing another case out of the Colorado Civil Rights Commission, challenging Colorado's anti-discrimination statute about a web designer who only wants to make wedding websites for opposite-sex couples. They've reined in federal regulatory power and will continue to do so just today in a case that is not making big headlines for obvious reasons. They heard a case called the EPA versus West Virginia, which, if decided in a broad sweeping way, could limit the ability of all regulatory agencies, not just the EPA, to regulate health, safety, welfare, and the economy. They've continued to gut the Voting Rights Act. This one is particularly pernicious because the Voting Rights Act, narrowly interpreting the Voting Rights Act, consistently gives electoral advantage to Republicans over Democrats. So by gutting the Voting Rights Act, by making it very difficult to enforce its provisions, the conservative majority is tipping the scales of every election against Democrats and in favor of Republicans. And that's just in the last year. So what's at stake? As I said, everything. While the Democrats can win every election from now until 2064, the Supreme Court will continue to be a hurdle to overcome. They'll continue to be a barrier to any kind of change that Democrats and progressives want to enact. As I like to talk to my students, they can play traffic cop, right? They can block Democratic legislation on voting rights, campaign finance, healthcare, the environment, while waving through businesses, corporations, the religious right, aggrieved white plaintiffs who feel oppressed by anti-discrimination statutes or racial equity programs. So what can we do? What can you do? Well, here I want to quote FDR for those of you who came to the reproductive rights rally in Memorial Park and heard me speak. This quote will be familiar to you. In 1937, FDR faced a similarly recalcitrant and conservative majority on the Supreme Court. 5 justices at that point were consistently striking down his New Deal legislation. And as FDR was wildly popular with a huge political mandate trying to lift the country out of the economic Great Depression, the Supreme Court was a barrier, right? Reading a cramped version of property rights and freedom to contract into the Constitution in order to push back against the federal government's regulatory power. And FDR took to the radio and addressed the people directly. He said, and I quote, "We've therefore reached the point as a nation where we must take action to save the Constitution from the court and the court from itself. We must find a way to take an appeal from the Supreme Court to the Constitution itself. We want a Supreme Court which will do justice under the Constitution and not over it. In our courts, we want a government of laws and not of men." He was, of course, proposing packing the court, adding 6 new seats, it would have been, to the Supreme Court of the United States that he and the Democrats would then get to fill with justices who would uphold his New Deal legislation. Yes, his court packing plan failed, but ultimately the pressure he put on the court was enough to flip 1 justice from the conservative majority to start voting with the liberals to uphold all of his New Deal legislation, right? Unfortunately, we have a Justice Roberts too, but he no longer has control of the court. There are now 6 Republican appointees. So even if we got Justice John Roberts to flip and join the liberals, which he has in a few cases, there are still 5 solid, stalwart conservative votes on the court. And so we come back to court reform, to court packing, to whatever that might look like. And as we think through this, I want to emphasize a few things. There is nothing constitutionally mandated or natural about the number 9. There are 9 Supreme Court justices now, but there have been as few as 5 and as many as 10. In fact, for the first 100 years of the Republic, Congress routinely exercised its constitutionally granted power to change the number of justices on the Supreme Court. Congress has this tool, a plain text reading of the Constitution. It's not even controversial. It's time to encourage them to dust it off and to use it. To that end, a small group of Democrats have introduced a bill in the House that would expand the Supreme Court from 9 to 13. Democratic leadership, Dick Durbin and Nancy Pelosi specifically have said they won't support it at this point. Write to them, pressure them, make them change their minds. Gerard Nadler, one of the co-sponsors, said that once the Supreme Court hands down one of its more, quote, destructive rulings, Pelosi and the Democrats will come around. But once the Supreme Court hands down one of these, quote, destructive rulings, gutting Roe versus Wade, reversing course on marriage equality, that decision has real consequences for real people. And let's not forget that 4 new justices on the court can't just join the court, wave a magic wand, and reverse those decisions right away. It might take years for a new case to work its way up, where they'll even have the opportunity to undo the damage of this current court. And in the meantime, real people will suffer. I want to close my remarks here just circling back to FDR and the constitutional crisis that he faced in 1937. He reminded his audience of the following raw acknowledgement of judicial power and supremacy from then Chief Justice Charles Evan Hughes. And he said, quote, "It is perfectly clear that, as Chief Justice Hughes has said, we are under a constitution, but the Constitution is what the judges say it is." It's also perfectly clear, as I hope I've convinced you, that we the people can use the constitutional tools at our disposal to assemble, to speak out, to criticize what those judges say, and that Congress can and should activate their constitutional power to say who the judges are and how many of them we need to truly do justice under our Constitution. And I'll end there on what I hope is a less disastrous note.
Okay, thank you for that, Professor Hollis-Brusky. Everybody, please give a round of applause while you have a chance. It could be on screen or it could be electronic like that. We're going to turn to questions and answers in just a second here. In case you are not already a member of the Democratic Club of Claremont, I am putting in the chat a link where you can become a member. So you can take a look at that member. In any case, let's take a show of hands here. Line up first. Who would like to toss out the first question for our presenter tonight? Go ahead. Dee Dee, then Merrill. Go ahead, Dee Dee.
You're muted, Dee Dee.
Thank you. Thanks, Chris. Thank you, Amanda. That was totally fascinating. My children have insisted that I not go to Washington and immolate myself on the steps of the Supreme Court. Astonishes me is the lack of feeling that the Democrats' hair is on fire about this, about the horrible changes that are already happening, the ease with which the court got packed with these very, very extreme, scary ideologues, and the effects that these are already having on women and the terror in the LGBTQ community, especially trans kids, and the impending threat to the environment posed by their anti-regulatory positions and so on. I just do not understand why there is not this feeling that this is an emergency, and that was obviously reflected in the commission's report, where that decided, oh well, you know, it's not so bad. We'll just stick with the status quo. So what is your opinion of why this process is so fraught? But they don't seem to be worried. Pelosi in particular. Thank you.
Thank you, Dee Dee, for the question. I share your frustration. In fact, in a minute, I'll pop a link into the chat. In addition to being an editor for the Washington Post Monkey Cage blog, I also write from time to time on the court. And I wrote very recently about this asymmetry of how Republicans are able to so effectively mobilize their voters to vote for the Supreme Court. If you look at exit polls from the 2016 election, Donald Trump holding up that list of judges that were approved by the Federal Society and the Heritage Foundation moved never Trumpers to vote for him, because they said, I hate this guy, but you know what? He's in the pocket of Leonard Leo and the Federal Society, And he's committed to appoint some of these young conservative justices to the Supreme Court if elected. I'm going to vote for him. And the exit polls reflect that. Democrats don't, in general, vote ideologically. We vote based on kind of group politics and identity politics and policies. We're interested in policies. Conservatives are in large part just a symbolic party held together by a set of ideas that don't ever operationalize into governance, but they're very mobilizing. And so I think that's why they've managed to so effectively organize around the courts. But I have a longer answer to this in my Washington Post piece, and I'll drop into the chat before the end of the meeting. Am I doing Q&A? Or am I calling on folks? Or Chris, are you calling on folks?
Merrill,
Is Merrill calling on folks?
Yes, I was.
you're next up.
Okay.
Suppose that you were called upon to give a speech to the country justifying what we call packing the court, not to convince Democrats, but the major speech to the country. How would you put that? What would you say?
You know, part of my frustration is I did give a major speech, right, to the United States House of Representatives. And then I presented another major piece of testimony to the Biden Court Commission. And the gist of it is this: all the political science, all the evidence demonstrates that the power of the court is 100% in the eyes of the people. If the people don't believe that their decisions are well-reasoned and legitimate, then their ability to exercise power, right, to exercise their counter-majoritarian power to strike down democratically enacted legislation is illegitimate. And that's where we're headed as a country. And so until or unless we can get justices on the court who at least reflect the perception of, judicial temperament and ruling consistently with some reasonable understanding of the Constitution, then no one's going to listen, right? Who's going to obey, or when the court hands down a major decision, right? The conservative equivalent of Brown versus Board, whatever that is, no one's going to obey. And that's problematic for the rule of law. I put much more articulately than that if I had a little bit more time to prepare. Of course, Meryl.
Okay, so let's go Karen, John, and then Mike.
Okay, thank you. I found your talk very enlightening and very threatening. So my question actually is a very minor piece of what that committee was looking at. They were also looking at terms of office. What do you think about having, they can only be in office for 15 years or 20 years instead of for a lifetime? Does that, or is that just meaningless in light of the larger problem?
No, and in fact, Karen, thank you for your question. One of what I did settle on as I was thinking through all these reforms myself was statutory term limits. So as you know, Article 3 says justices and judges will hold their offices during good behavior. That has been translated as for life. Right? So they have lifetime appointments. So unless you want to change the Constitution, amend the Constitution, that's tricky to get around. However, there is a movement to do statutory term limits. What would that look like? Back in the day, before the circuit courts were very well developed, in the 1800s, justices used to ride circuit.
Yep.
What that means is that they would actually get on their horses and ride from the Supreme Court down to where they were hearing appellate court cases, and they would help out the appellate court judges, issue rulings, and then they'd ride back up to SCOTUS. Some scholars have proposed current appellate court judges riding SCOTUS for a fixed term, 12 years, 15 years. And then they would ride back down and serve out the rest of their lifetime appointment if they should choose. That seems to get around the constitutional issues. The problem is that very same statute would be under judicial review by our current justices, who could, under a reading of the Constitution, strike that down under the appointments clause.
Okay.
So I think what regularized Supreme Court appointments do is turn down the heat and say, look, every one-term president gets one, every two-term president gets two. They'd be staggered 12, 15-year terms. And you could introduce new seats. Congress could create new seats, but have those be term-limited seats. And then as the other justices die and retire, you term limit those seats as well. So over a period of a few decades, the idea is that you have 12 term limited seats. All right.
Thank you.
John Forney, you're up. You're next. John, you're also muted, my friend.
Thank you so much. I also have to say your speech, while marvelous, was about as encouraging as having 100,000 of Putin's tanks on your doorstep.
I know.
And it seems that you're right. The arguments will not carry the day. Cite global warming. Bill McKibben says, well, I wrote a book and I thought that solved it. Well, here we are. So I think we need to find out how you appeal to people's better angels and appeal to their good emotions. And the only group I know doing it is a Republican group, the Lincoln Project. That's why I give them money. The other group that's doing it as effectively has been vote vets who are more tied to the Democratic Party. But these people are putting out killer ads that really get the issue home. If you were going to select a new ad agency for the Democratic Party, what would you be looking for?
Well, I mean, it's beyond the scope of my particular expertise, but I will say there are a few groups out there who were also shut out of Biden's Court Reform Commission, by the way. So Demand Justice, Brian Fallon, he was actually a former staffer of Chuck Schumer and has gotten deeply involved in the issue of court reform. He was the one with those posters out in front of the Supreme Court saying Breyer retire for months, like driving them back and forth in front of the Supreme Court. There are groups out there who are taking up the mantle, but the Democratic sort of mainstream establishment is not listening.
Well, the other thing I would say, we may need to have to go hardball against our own group. When you look at the 64 convention, Fannie Lou Hamer went there and totally embarrassed the Democratic Party, embarrassed Johnson. She made him look like a real chump. Well, we may have to do that to Democrats who do not believe the Supreme Court's important.
Maybe. And I do think that Gerard Nadler is right, that if and when the Supreme Court hands down a major ruling on abortion, and I think that's about the only thing that could get people in the streets. Heck, it's the thing that got us in the streets at the Claremont rally. But today was a major case, but no one's out rallying about non-delegation doctrine and the major questions doctrine and the nuts and bolts of regulatory power. And yet that is where the courts are stealthily going to undo the administrative state. They're going to undo it and no one's going to pay attention because it's not abortion or guns, right?
Well, thank you much, but that's why we need new ad agency.
Okay.
Mike Bose, you're up.
Yeah, thank you, Amanda, for that excellent presentation. I greatly appreciate it. So to the extent that, as we mentioned, the Democratic establishment seems to be resistant to some of these important reforms that we would need to make progress. How much of that do you think is due to the leadership like Pelosi? They don't want to unilaterally disarm as far as fundraising goes. And they're afraid that if they if they do climb on board with some of these reforms that have been discussed, that they will lose important funding for elections going forward. That's it.
So Mike, is the idea that the sort of Wall Street folks would be averse to court reform because there is a friendly conservative majority in there that is fairly deregulatory, or is that what you're thinking?
Well, that's part of it, yeah, and just being risk averse, and being worried about losing donations, and all of that. But anyway, that's kind of what I was getting at, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, and this sort of circles back to Dee Dee's initial question: why is it that the right is able to fundraise on this stuff, and yet the left is hesitant to embrace court reform because they're afraid of disturbing the status quo? I don't know what the answer is, but I am fairly convinced that unless Democrats see something drastic coming down from the Supreme Court, right? I think there's still this like Warren court. The courts are good people. The courts created a right to marriage equality recently. Even Neil Gorsuch signed on to that one opinion that wrote protections into the Civil Rights Act for LGBTQ folks. They can't be that bad. And I would hate for it to be after something really disastrous happens that the Democrats finally wake up, because as I argue, it's going to be years before we can undo some of this damage.
Okay, thank you. Ivan, you wanted to ask a question.
Thanks, Al. I really appreciated your presentation, and I'd like to leave you with a question to hear your response. So basically, when I think about it all, the Supreme Court, the Electoral College, the United States Senate backed against us, I come to the conclusion that we live in a country with a minority government, and that we can't change that because we can't change it with electoral rules. So basically, I conclude that we're not a democracy. What do you think?
I think I'll come back to the Ziblatt and Levitsky book that I quoted back to Jim Jordan when he was screaming at me on the floor of the House of Representatives, which is that we are dangerously close, right? We have all of the hallmarks of democratic backsliding. And the Trump administration really only accelerated some of the worst, kind of got rid of those last guardrails. What can happen? What can happen? You talk about minority rule, eliminate the filibuster. Eliminate the filibuster. Pass voting rights legislation that is bulletproof, that will make it that the court can't possibly dismantle. Tip some of the scales back in favor of the majority. And the courts, you're right, they are a minority institution. They are a great and attractive home for a political party whose agenda is more and more unpopular and will not win electorally in the decades to come, but they can enshrine their agenda in the courts. So you change the face of the courts. Congress has the power under Article 1, the clear power to add seats to the court, to add seats to the lower federal courts, to create new circuits, to move everything around so that you put in folks who are not sort of federal society stalwarts.
Congress has the power, but you pointed out that the court is tilting the electoral system against the Democrats. So the people who have the power to make the change don't get into office.
Yeah, I do think
because the Supreme Court is there, among other things, and because the filibuster is there. No, they're not going to give away the filibuster.
Well, that's it. I mean, that the only way forward, Ivan, I can see is eliminate filibuster, pass that sweeping voting rights bill that the Dems have had ready to go, that it would make a difference. It wouldn't solve everything, but it would at least make a difference.
Okay, Merrill, you get a second one, and then I'm going to ask a question after you, Merrill. So go
Yeah,
ahead.
okay, well, this is sort of a concluding quality. We've so far dealt with big issues. Why don't you give us your soundbite evaluation of each member of the current court?
Oh, God. John Roberts has lost control. It takes 4 justices to vote to hear a case. They're voting to hear cases that he would never vote to take up for fear of making the court look political, bad, and illegitimate. So there are 4 justices on the court right now who are ready to just go for it and go for everything. And I don't think he's happy about it. Clarence Thomas would like us to go back to 1937, where FDR was saying, you know, the constitutional revolution of 1937, he would like to see it play out the opposite way. He believes everything that we have done since 1937 is wrong. Brett Kavanaugh is not bright. He is a country club entitled white guy who's gotten so far with so few brain cells. And the fact that he is writing opinions is frightening because they're just legally wrong. Even the conservatives are pointing it out, like just legally wrong, bad. Alito is a partisan hack. That's pretty much it. Amy Coney Barrett is extremely strategic and will be on the court for 30 years and is going to be the most influential justice on the court in about a decade. Sonia Sotomayor is the progressive that everyone wished or thought RBG was. And, you know, I was a big admirer of RBG, but Sonia Sotomayor is the real deal. Elena Kagan is probably the best legal mind on the court and the most strategic of the Democratic appointees. And she and John Roberts sort of, she was very smart to cozy up to him because I think she swayed him in several cases, but now that he's lost control, I think she no longer has the influence that she had. And our new justice, it looks to be wonderful and very progressive. And even though she clerked for Breyer, who was not that progressive, but there's only 3 of them. And short of somebody dying unexpectedly, the conservatives on the court, they're going to be in the minority for a very long time.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Amanda, you anticipated my question about Brown Jackson. So let's move forward. John, let's end with these 2 questions. John Forney and Karen Rosenthal.
Just one brief question. How do we really deal with the systematic imbalance that's placed against progressives in this country? As we know, yes, they have elections in Russia. And as Stalin said, what matters is not who votes, but who counts the votes. And we look forward to having possibility of another 4 years of Trump. That could happen. How do we strategically position ourselves to wage this war?
Yeah. I'm going to go back to what I said, Ivan, but you have to eliminate the filibuster, and then you have to pass voting rights legislation, and then you have to you have to pack the courts. You have to create a bunch of new seats on the Supreme Court and the lower federal courts to tip that balance more favorably back towards Democrats. And then you open up the electoral process to people who actually want to be public servants, right? Public financing of campaigns, limit the number of months that elections can happen, try to get the right kind of people. It's like the reform-minded Watergate babies in the wake of Nixon's impeachment, right? We need another wave of folks like that who actually can make meaningful structural change so that the Democrat, that the majority will becomes the guiding vision of the country, not the minority.
I'm afraid to do that. We're going to have to wage war against our own party, the way that Fannie Lou Hamer and the Mississippi Freedom Democrats did.
All right, well, suit up.
I think,
Karen, we're going to let you get last question in, and then we're going to.
Well, it's kind of refers back to her comments or your comments on the new candidate for the Supreme Court. How long do you think that the hearings will take, and how brutal will the hearings be?
You know, I don't anticipate the same kind of massive resistance to this nomination for two reasons. Number one, the country is distracted. There are major international crises that people are paying attention to. And number two, this is someone who has already gone through the vetting and was voted in with very little opposition and very little fanfare to the lower federal courts. So I think you will see politicians trying to score political points by painting her as a crazy radical leftist. But I don't see, Manchin or Sinema, they voted for her the first time around. Again, maybe I am underestimating the other side. This is not for the balance of power, right? This is not Scalia's seat.
That's true.
Let's remember, if Barack Obama had filled Scalia's seat, we're talking about a 5-4 liberal majority on the court,
Sure.
Right? So that even if Trump had been elected and Ginsburg had died, then it's still only 5-4 the other way. So
Thank you.
yeah.
I'm just not ready for another bruising battle. So thank you.
Okay, I see Andy has raised his hand, but Andy, we really need to make yours the last question, and then we'll move forward.
Yeah, I want to hear from Andy. We get to hear from Andy.
that's sort of been, but I guess my question really is, it strikes me that it's going to take much more than just majority rule. I mean, given the number of votes it takes in different states to elect a senator, and the fact that the Senate is by structure always going to support the minority. It's just
Yeah.
not a majority institution. And given the gerrymandering that's going on and what have you, even now the House of Representatives is not directly proportional. The imbalance is there as well. And then you have the courts. I guess the question is, I agree with what you were saying. It strikes me, until enough people get angry in the streets and really force change at the local level in terms of the voting process, it's a pretty depressing picture. And I think everything having to do with the Electoral College and the Electoral College reforms, unfortunately seems to be making that worse. And I guess my question to you is one key question. Given that the Constitution allows Congress to rewrite the rules for the elections of Congress people and senators, that's there. It says it's done by the states, but Congress can do it. But that is not there for the Electoral College. There is nothing in the Constitution that grants power to the Congress to rewrite how the states handle the Electoral College process. What's the possibility? I mean, we could really lose any possibility of majority rule for the presidency. I mean, that could be gone.
Yeah, I mean, short of a constitutional amendment or something like the states compact, where each state decides for itself to give its, votes to proportionally. You're right. The other thing I just want to emphasize, this is what I talk to my students about when they become very, as I do, as you know, like I live and breathe and teach this stuff. So it's hard not to feel disempowered or cynical or helpless. But not all politics is national. I mean, we tend to focus on the federal government. We tend to focus on these big constitutional issues. make politics local again, right? Think about ways that we can act in California that help folks who are in Texas and women in Texas who can't get access to reproductive health care. What are the ways outside of the channels of government that we can help one another, lift one another up, take care of the most vulnerable among us until we can shake out all of these big systemic barriers at the national level? And it's something I talk to my students about a lot when they lose hope.
It's
So
a very good point. And we're going to have something locally. We're about to have a battle over how these districts are going to be drawn for city council.
yeah,
And that
and
can
those things matter too.
Yeah, it does, because there are people who are trying to basically guarantee a safe seat for Corey. I mean, that's part of what's going on right now. So there's going to be an interesting question as to, can we get a reasonably democratic, and I mean with a small d,
Yeah.
broadly democratic set of districts, even in a place like Claremont.
Okay, everybody. Is that Andy's phone? Everybody, let's give a hand and a big round of thanks for Professor
you.
Hollis-Brusky's talk today. Thank you so much for coming today and presenting to us. We've
Thanks
learned
for
a lot,
having me.
more to learn.
And thank you for your work. Thank you to everyone for your work.
Okay, everybody take a deep breath. We're going to move on to the business portion of our meeting today. I think that in the interest of time and in the interest of the incredible work that Carolee does for this club and continues to do day in and day out, I want to give her the floor again while everyone's fresh. And then I'll just say something later when we come to political strategy, because I have a couple things I'd like to add to whatever our committee says. However, before I forget, those of you who are still here, if you are not yet a member, I put a link in the chat. Become a member of the Democratic Club of Claremont. We have many programs. This is just one of them. Hopefully things are going to improve rapidly enough that we could start seeing each other in person again, but we need to make that decision. We haven't made it yet. Thanks too to Ivan for stepping forward and volunteering to help us draft questionnaires for County Sheriff and State Assembly. If anybody else wants to join in, it's a great learning experience. You'll have your imprint on the questions that we ask those people who are seeking our endorsement. Okay, with that, what I'd like to do is turn it back over to Carolee. Mike, are you still here? I've lost you on my screen. Okay, there you are. Thank you. And you can resume, Carolee, what you were saying, because we need some volunteers to help out. And then after that, it will be Carol as treasurer for her report.
Okay, I'm using my daughter-in-law's computer now. I'm going back and forth so that I can talk on this one. All right, what we'll do is I will ask Mike to distribute a flyer that I've made. How can you help us participate in the 4th of July? And basically we'll send it out. Yeah, there it is. And you know, if you can get a group together for any theme and any issue, we'll produce, and you give us the idea for a t-shirt design, we'll produce it for you. You have to sign up with the committee, or I think it's the Claremont High boosters, cross-country boosters. Anyway, if you sign up and get a group together, you could really promote some idea about democracy or whatever you think is important for this coming election, for the people of Claremont to see you running around town in. Then if you wanted to help take part in the parade, you can walk, you can decorate, carry a poster with whatever your message is. You can decorate the truck, you can carry the banner, you can drive a car. If you want to help with the booth, if you have any idea that you think will make us a lot of money, I'd love to know about it. If you don't think we can make money and you just want to suggest what we can do to attract visitors and get them to be involved with us. All of these ideas, we need to hear from you, every one of us, and we need to come back to Claremont strong. We haven't been out there in front of the community for more than 2 years. So this is our opportunity. So let's go for it. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Carolee. Again, if you can make a contribution to Carolee's efforts, to the club's efforts, drop your name in the chat, and then we'll make sure that someone records it, okay, so that Carolee can get back to you. We all need to chip in. I volunteered. I've let Carolee know that when it comes to the talent, the skill set that Carolee has, I'm better at taking orders and directions than in exercising initiative. In other areas, I'm great at exercising initiative, but that's not my area. Just tell me what to do, I'll do it. And if you're like me, I'll put your name in the chat. Okay, let's see. I think Carol, you're next. Treasurer's report.
I'm next. I was going to write it out this time, but I didn't get to that. So this week or this month, our balance right now is $10,075. I made a deposit I've only one deposit in February. So well, now it's over, but it was $310. That was a couple of new members and some renewals. There's still a few folks out there that haven't renewed. So I keep watching for those folks. I may be hounding you, or I'll send Juan Carlos after you. But at any rate, we appreciate every contribution that you make, whether it's the minimum amount of dues or not. And also there were no additions this month to our political action fund. And we still have $1,643 that we'll be able to use to help encourage our people that we're going to endorse. And that's about it. Does anybody have any questions?
Hey, thank you, Carol. I'm going to drop the link in for the Political Action Fund into the chat, and there'll be more that we can say about that. Oops, that didn't come out right. So let me put it as a link. That's better. Merrill, you are next.
As what? Programs?
Yeah, no, as everything that you do, programs.
Okay. We'll start with programs.
Everything.
We're still working on a date for the past mayors to talk about how the budgeting process in Claremont goes. And so I can't fix any dates for sure. Andy has moved, will be speaking in April. Chris, you moved to May, is that correct?
I'll be doing Memorial Day. Someone has to go for
Okay, Memorial Day. So we shall, once I know exactly when the mayors have agreed to get together, then I'll have to insert them there. Otherwise, I think we'll have a program out. Once that's done, those will be programs out very soon. As the issues committee, look, I'll just combine these things in interest of speed. This is a strange month in that we have the club meeting on one day and the very next day the Voorhees Voice is due out. Well, it's ready to go except for what we do tonight. So tomorrow the Voorhees Voice will be out. There will be all sorts of issues in there about what the club has done and will be doing. So be sure and read the Voice when it comes out tomorrow.
Excellent. And Merle, I'll have you know that I've got a meeting set with Karen and Joe, who are both on this meeting here, for immediately following our meeting here today. And Ethan is invited as well. And we'll try and hammer out a date or two. Okay. And Sam's invited. I don't know if he'll be there, but we can conduct business, the three of us. In any case, next up is membership. Juan Carlos is not able to make it tonight, so we'll go to Mike. corresponding secretary. Mike, I know, has a lot on his plate.
Well, yeah, I'll try to keep it brief, but there's a lot of great things happening. I think since we met last, I should mention that we sent a letter to Chris Holden congratulating him on his appointment to the Appropriations Committee. And then other things that we've started to form our Communications Committee. We added Jacqueline Elizalde and Lawrence Murata Shi to our committee. And we had our first meeting last week, and they already started making an impact. They're younger members and have a lot of experience in the political world from their point of view and social media. One of the things that we're doing also is setting up redoing our website. Our website is sorely inadequate and has fallen into disrepair over the years. And so we're in the process of negotiating and hiring a company called Zone Websites to redo our website. And I know Carol was working on how we could pay for that, because traditionally we haven't had some of the, like credit card or debit card type things. So, but I think, Carol, if I got you correctly, you did make some headway on that today.
Yeah.
So that's fantastic. One thing regarding the website, though, is we're going to need some fresh images, some fresh photographs. So I'm going to start reaching out to some people that I know that have been at some recent events, but if you have some images that you'd like to share with us, that would be really helpful, so that we can really freshen up this new website with dynamic imagery and quality in imagery. So anyway, if you think you have something, please send something to this. This would be, I see a question, images of people, messages. Yeah, images of people, actions mostly. I think, if other people have ideas, that's great. I know that we sponsored, the Democratic Club, we co-sponsored the Women's March in October. Amanda referenced that a little bit because she gave a very good speech. We also had Judy Chu and Norma Torres and a representative from Planned Parenthood, a whole variety of people there. And I think that there are some photographs out there. So, that kind of stuff that shows us taking action anyway, so, but I wouldn't say that it's limited to that, but that immediately comes to mind. So that would be a big help if you have anything. Also, we're looking at switching over to MailChimp. I think that will upgrade our capacity to send out email blasts and provide additional content. We're going to start with the free version and see how that serves us. One of the things we need to do is be able to figure out how to transfer over our email addresses that we currently have, and copy them over to MailChimp, hopefully without having to do them all individually, one by one. Then we've signed up for Canva, so we can produce graphic content that we can share on the internet, and also one of the things that Lawrence and Jacqueline helped us with was set up an Instagram account, and I don't remember what else. Chris, you were there. Do you remember? Didn't we set up another account? Twitter, that's right. So setting them up for our club, and so that we can really have more of an outreach to the various communities that would be inclined to join us but don't really know anything about us, or if they do, they think of us as a bunch of old stodgies. And so that's kind of what we're working on. And I guess that's my report.
Okay, thanks, Mike. And the one thing I'll mention, just to put things in perspective, is that we haven't had the pleasure yet of meeting Jacqueline Elizalde in a general membership meeting. She was recently appointed to the Communications Committee, along with Lawrence, who is at this meeting tonight. And if any of you are on social media and see our Facebook posts, both of them were featured recently on Facebook. Ethan, too, I should mention, this is more of an aside, but Ethan was appointed to the Program and Issues Committee, and he was also, a short bio of his was posted on Facebook as well. And I plan to do something for our newest member of the Program and Issues Committee, that's Andy Winnick. So when Andy sends me his bio and photo, I'll post that to Facebook as well. Not going to exclude Andy, that's for sure. But I figured the other three were priority because they're new and everyone knows Andy. So they've been out there. Anyway, what I wanted to say is, in terms of perspective, Jacqueline ran for office twice in Pomona, and she's got a list of people. You know what the size of her list is? She says she has a list of 10,000. That's her list. She has a list of 10,000. If we're going to grow as a club and have more impact in the community, we need to grow our list, which currently numbers in the hundreds. So we're really looking toward Lawrence and Jacqueline to provide us with the know-how that we can grow and continue to grow inside the club so that we can grow our list and have more impact in the community. In any case, I think it's next up is political strategy. So I'll turn that over to Dee Dee.
Thanks, Chris. Hi, everybody. I just loved our speaker tonight. Not that it didn't make me pretty homicidal, but it was very, very good. The reason I'm speaking for the Political Strategy Committee is that, as you probably know, Debbie Evans has stepped back for a little while. And so it fell to me to try to chair it. So my friends, Joe and Sandy are here. They're on the committee. So if I goof it up, let me just interrupt me, you guys. I want to start by commenting on the surveys, which you all, I'm sure, remember. I know your responses were indelibly imprinted on your cerebrums. So I just wanted to say what has happened with the results that we got from those surveys. Firstly, we found out that there is some confluence of interest in particular issues. And so we're using those most important to the members' issues to sort of organize some of our advocacy. And based on that, on the surveys, and part of the response to the surveys asked you, remember, if you were interested in being more active and in pursuing the idea of following up on legislation that we were interested in that focused on some of these issues, perhaps. And your responses to that led us to form a group that we're calling the Advocates Group. And there are 17 on our list currently. We had proposed to get together with you, but we experienced one of many, what I'll call meet us, interrupt us. This one was related to the windstorm. Remember, we were all going to get together on the weekend that everybody's power went out. But that doesn't mean we won't call on you. And we will. We divided you up among us on the committee, and that may be a big surprise to you because I know those of you on my list have not heard from me. So I don't know about people on Sandy's and Joe's or Palana's lists, but we will be talking about how we can work with you to do the main thing that we wanted to do, which was figure out what bills that are moving through committees or the assembly or any state offices that are important to us that could be affected by our advocacy or potentially our opposition too, if we don't like them, and how we can mobilize that support, not just in the club, but outside of the club as well too. So we did have also a high overall response rate on our survey, which I think is important to point out. Chris says it was 40%. I had forgotten exactly, but that's a real, I'm an anthropologist, a social scientist, so that's a great response rate. And that datum is something that we can also use to increase the power of the club, in the sense that it betokens our level of enthusiasm and willingness to take action on things that we're concerned about. That itself is something we can say to these office holders when we go to see them and say, well, what's happening with this bill? And what about this aspect of it? They're going to have to listen to us, because they're going to understand that we're very activist oriented organization. Along the same lines, I would like to grow our membership, not just change or add to the demographic that we have, but also just increase our numbers. And that too will increase our power if we can do that. I know Chris supports that. He is now showing us the scorecard, legislative priorities and scorecard, that we would like to develop and use strategically to, I might say, lobby or at least communicate with our representatives and office holders. And we can use our research on different bills, which we're doing through a particular software program that's called Bill Track 50, to specify exactly what's going on that we're focusing on, that we care about, that they want that we want them to do X, Y, or Z with. We in the committee have all now had some training in this software. And it's going to help us with this research, as I said, for advocacy. It will help us with that scorecard. And Chris is now showing us what it looks like, the Bill Track 50 tool. And this is a tremendous resource. It looks a little daunting at first, but our trainer walked us through it, and it has some tutorial stuff in here. So we are paying for this. My guess is if you wanted to participate in this part of the politics that we're doing, that Chris can help you sign up right away. Tell me if that's not true, Chris. But so there are many, many ways to use this tool. And so I think it has been a very, very good investment. We can look at things from the federal standpoint, the state standpoint, or you even get that down into other regions and so on, to see what is going on. And there are a bunch of different filters that we can use. So my interest areas are essentially environment, education, democracy. But even those are so broad, you can put that in, but you can still use very broad topics to move through the different bills. I'll just conclude my report, unless, because I know Chris has some more stuff to say about this, by pointing out a little exchange that we had in one of our last committee meetings, which was that we talked about, well, don't we also have a larger mission, a broader mission? And is that not for us as a small organization to connect with the broader community, not just in which we live, but our part of the state and the state, perhaps the whole party. And to do that, to reach out to other organizations, to develop tools and resources that we can share with them so that we end up with a much larger coalition than just what we have among ourselves. And that way we become stronger, and so do they. And so in this vein, we've started talking to some of the other organizations, not that we didn't before, but I had a fairly long interview with somebody from Sustainable Claremont the other day. And they're very interested in working with us. And I think that is probably true of Claremont Change and a number of other associations, organizations, clubs, or groups. So I hope you all support that idea, and that if you are interested in any aspect of this, whether it is going to people's offices and talking to them about what they're doing in their committees or what legislation they have in mind and would like to shape it to make it more coherent or more appealing to people. If we have things we want them to know about us, about things that are happening in our community, if you like that, or if you just want to work on getting out the vote, I'm sure we're going to get involved in that. The midterms are coming up. So let us know. Thank you.
Thanks, Dee Dee. And a number of people raised their hands. So John, I know that we have your report. We're not going to forget about your report. We're going to leave you time for that. But if this is a question about what Dee Dee was saying, you can go ahead. Joe Lyons also raised his hand. Joe, if you have anything you want to add after John asks his questions, go ahead.
This is a question or a suggestion. I looked through this list of political reform, and my eyes glaze over. Now it could be because I'm ADD, but it would be helpful if you could maybe put a color background and with those 4 or 5 issues that we've surfaced as the club, which are our priority issues and which bills actually pertain to those aspects of political engagement.
So John, so Joe, if I could just ask your patience, let me respond to John. John, that's a great question. I'm going to try and do this quickly because I've been yakking a lot tonight. I want other people to have the floor, but let's just do a new share here. And I want to go back to this. Okay. So you see our scorecard now. Okay. Now the scorecard here, if you take a look at this middle column here that says category, these categories were taken from the survey that we sent out and had a 40% response rate to. And these were the leading categories.
Those are exactly the ones I'm thinking on. If we had a different color background for each of those issues and placed it on the previous chart of all the bills coming up, then we know what pertains to our issues.
Yeah, well, so that's what the committee is doing. And the committee is going to bring forward a proposal in 12 days, 13 days. So the clock is ticking to come up with a proposal with specific pieces of legislation that the club can support under each of those categories. We're not trying to be all things to all people. We're trying to identify 9 pieces of legislation that are the club's priorities. One of them, so I'm taking over for Debbie while she's stepping back. So I'm working on the issue of political reform, and the committee has decided to tackle that at the federal level as opposed to the state or local level. Okay. And so my responsibility is to come up with a specific piece of federal legislation that the club can back in the area of political reform. The software that we just purchased, Bill Track 50, enables us to do that more efficiently. So if we go back here, you could see that my name or my initials are here by political reform. We've done a preliminary search, and after a few days of work, I've limited it to 53 bills. And my task between now and March 13th is to limit that 53 to 1 with a couple backups. Okay. And everyone else on the committee is doing something similar with the areas that they've been assigned. It'll come to the executive committee for a vote. And then after that, it will go to the general membership for a vote at the meeting 1 month from today. Joe Lyons, you had a question.
Well, it was just going to be a comment again that given the effort that is being made, this is a tremendous opportunity for people to get in, know and learn about legislation that's an area of their passion. All of the group leaders are looking for people with a passion to come and kind of identify those things that might be on their mind in legislation. So I think this is a tremendous opportunity for the club to get engaged in this particular process, but to acquaint ourselves and get firsthand knowledge as to how our electeds are thinking about these issues. So sign on with any one of the groups that you see here that might interest you. And this will be the second round will be activating the club's initiatives to move these pieces of legislation forward. So thank you for the time to just speak. But again, a tremendous opportunity. Again, Chris, thank you for kind of moving this in the right direction.
Yeah. So as Joe alluded, we're going to be making legislative visits to our legislators locally, not in Washington or Sacramento, but locally. So we'll visit the local office of Portantino, of Holden, of Chu, of Padilla, of Feinstein, and advocate for these pieces of legislation. And we're going to involve as many people in the club as want to get involved in this effort. We make an appointment, we go to the office, we make our pitch. I've done this before, and many people on this call have done this before. We're just going to do it as a club. I can't see anybody else's hands. Are there any other hands up? Okay, not hearing or seeing any other hands. There's just one other thing that I want to share with people. So if you give me a moment here. I said that we are doing endorsements, and that raises the question, what are we going to do after we do the endorsements? Well, we're going to support the candidates we endorse, and what the way we demonstrate clout is by getting people, when they do something, whether it's write a postcard or make a phone call, knock on a door, send a text message, write a letter to the editor, write a letter to one of their legislators, right? Whenever they do something like that, to fill out this political activism form. Now, we're not going to worry about this now, but next month this will become relevant because it just says, what kind of activity did you do on behalf of one of our endorsed candidates? Was it door-to-door, door knocking, phone banking, texting, postcard writing? When did you do it? And how many hours did you spend doing it? Dee Dee and I are familiar with this because our labor union, the California Faculty Association, asks us whenever we participate in some political activity to fill out a similar form so that the organization as a whole can report the total number of hours that it used its own clout or muscle to people who seek its endorsements in the future. So I'd like us to start gathering that information so that when candidates seek our endorsement, we could say, hey, this is what our endorsement is worth. It's worth this many person hours of activity. So this is what we need to do. Instead of having it be unknown or have it be scattered or decentralized, we need to centralize at least the information so that we could say our endorsement comes with this much backing. If we do that for 2022, then I can guarantee you when 2024 comes around, we're going to have people who are going to be more eager for our endorsement. Okay. That's all I got to say. And I'd now like to turn things over to John Forney, who has our last report, the past president's report. John, it's all yours.
Well, I agree completely with you, Chris. Our major push has to be to expand that list and then take care of them. I have a little more moral story here connected with my mouse at my computer. I can't find it anywhere. I must not have fed it, and it's wandered off. And that's what's going to happen to our voters if we don't take care of them. They'll wander off. And so your idea about getting a place for everyone and everyone in their place, at least give them an opportunity, is very important, and building that list. That's my report. It's my story. It's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Okay. I've dropped in the chat Mike Booz's email address. Send your action photos to him. Okay. Send the picture of you at the barricades. It doesn't matter if it was last year or 10 years ago. Just send one.
Well, yeah, we have a lot of good pictures from our last 4th of July parade, at least when we can have one.
So two things. I want to recognize Andy, who's raised his hand, and I owe an apology to Sandy Hester. Sandy's also on the political strategy committee, and I want to invite Sandy if she would like to add anything to add anything to what we've said. Andy, you're up first.
Yeah, well, I have we reached, I don't want to interrupt, but have we reached point for some announcements type of thing, or?
Sure.
Okay. What I want to let everyone know, in very much in consistent with Amanda's comment about the need to get involved with local politics, a group of us who are actually all in the club, Chris, myself, Mike, Dee Dee, have been working with the group that's called Inclusive Claremont. It actually was started by the students. They then reached out to get some of the adult activists with them, and then of course all the students left. So now it's the adults going back to try to get re-engage the students. The issue that we're involved with at the moment, and everyone may want to chip in on this one, is up in La Puerta, up on Forbes Street. There's an issue of housing that's going up, and I don't want to take a lot of time on it, but basically the issue is, are we going to build a handful of $1 million houses for families that can afford it, or are we going to build a broader range of smaller houses and more moderate and lower income houses, and that would give opportunities for whether it's some of our senior citizens who want to downsize, whether it's students who want to stay in the community, whether it's the workers and the retail sales, groundskeepers, secretaries, whatever, who would like to live in Claremont as well as work here, but can't find a place. And so we're going to be pushing the affordable housing issue. If you're interested, I'll ask Mike to distribute a statement that we're making to the city planner and what have you on this topic later this week. And if you're interested in getting involved with the group, reach out to any of us, Chris, Mike, myself, Dee Dee. And I think that's all I want to say right now.
Thank you, Andy. Sandy, I just want to let you know you can chime in whenever you want if you have anything to add. If not, no big deal. John?
Andy, I have a question.
Yep.
What can we do to change the laws in terms of financing for low-income housing? Pilgrim Place is talking about building low-income housing, and that's a wonderful thing. I certainly support it. But if you look at the history of places like Cabrini Green, the only time Cabrini Green ever succeeded was right after the war, when you had a whole mix of veterans coming back home in terms of income groups, race, and social class. After they raised the minimum, or lowered the minimum to get into Cabrini Green, and started excluding people in the middle class and upper classes, the whole thing fell apart. And what we found out in LA when I built low-income housing, if you could get a mix going, but The problem is our economics and the laws supporting the project do not allow for that.
Well, actually, that's not quite true, John. I mean, our city ordinance basically says that any development we put up has to have at least 15% low and moderate income housing. And of that, 5% has to be low and 5% has to be moderate minimum. And then the total has to add to 15, which is an improvement over what's been up until now. And so, we're going to try to push that. So we're not talking about, building 500 units of low income housing. We're talking about integrating a reasonable amount of low and moderate income housing in with market price housing. And indeed, the developers are quite capable of pricing things in such a range to make that happen. The housing development that's going up around Trader Joe's now is going to be literally a couple hundred units of both condos for sale and apartments for rent. And that indeed will have 15%, probably all moderate because it's the old city ordinance. But we will get at least some affordable housing. The reason Forbes is a big issue is we right now have zero affordable housing north of Baseline Avenue. And we need to get some. One of the things that's already in the housing guidelines that the city has approved is that we are not going to do that. We're going to try to distribute it. But the problem is every time we try to distribute it in upper middle class parts of town, we get tremendous NIMBY behavior by people who don't want it. And so these are going to be political fights in each and every development to try to get a mix, but nobody's talking about massive amounts of low income housing. We're talking about integrating low and moderate income housing. Now, having said that, there is another category called very low income housing. And the simple truth is developers won't do it and can't do it. And that's going to require federal and state and other funding to actually get some proportion of very low income housing. But low and moderate income housing, they can make enough money on the others to make that a go, and they have. We've got a couple of those going. You're going to have some of it in Village South, for example.
Andy, I'm going to have to put you in touch with our Pilgrim Place folks that are working on this so that they get the message then.
Okay, will do. By the way, just to identify two other issues, since I've been put on the floor again for a moment. You should know that there is an effort right now statewide to develop a system of public banks so that the governmental entities throughout the state, instead of putting their money in the big New York banks, will put their money in a local bank, at least a proportion of that money, and that money will become available exactly for this sort of thing, for building lower cost housing, supporting minority businesses and so forth. And there is a group of people working from San Dimas, Laverne, Pomona, and Claremont. And we're going to be putting one of those bank proposals together. However, we want to be, there's going to be 10 of them in the state. We want to be number 6. We're going to let San Francisco and LA and a couple other places go first, because the startup costs for business plans is about $100,000 to $200,000, and we'd like to piggyback on somebody else's work. The other thing is that there's some new work, and I won't get into details, going on the question of single payer housing and a much broader perception of what that is. That is moving forward through various groups and organizations. Again, if you're interested in that area, you can talk about it. So a lot of my energy is in those areas as well, which is why I'm not quite as involved in the club as I might otherwise be. All righty, I'll shut up.
Sorry, it's John, I think you already asked, so I need to lower your hand. And Mike, then Karen.
Yeah, thanks. Just to quickly follow up on what Andy was saying.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I skipped ahead. It was really Carolee who was next in the queue. Sorry, Mike. Carolee, go ahead.
Okay, in tomorrow's Voorhees Voice, there's an article about a request asking that you contribute to the Latina Roundtable Cesar Chavez Breakfast. In the past, the club has bought a table thinking that members would reimburse the club, but that hasn't happened. This way, if you go directly to their website, you can get a donation that you can write off. You can make a donation and write it off. Maybe that'll be more incentive. This is a wonderful local organization. Thanks.
Mike?
Yeah, just a real short comment. Following up on what Andy was saying, based on the experience that we've had advocating for low-income housing in Claremont, it seems apparent that if we follow the traditional for-profit developer model, where cities rely on for-profit companies to build the housing, that we're not going to get enough low-income housing, so we do need to get national, state, and maybe regional resources to help finance this, because if just relying on a for-profit model, they can't. These companies apparently can't afford to build the kind of housing that would accommodate the need here in Claremont. And that's all aside from NIMBYism and things like that. But anyway, that's all I have. Andy, if I got that wrong, let me know. But anyway, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, Karen, thanks for your patience. You're next.
Thank you. I have several comments. One is the situation at La Puerta Park is a little more complicated because the land needs to be rezoned in order to accommodate any housing, and the neighbors don't want any housing. They want the school district to preserve the land, which the school district owns, rather than split the two lots. In other words, that whole piece of property could be split by the school district, and they could sell off only one half and preserve the other half for the baseball fields or softball fields or whatever they are. But the neighbors are mounting a whole thing. They don't want any housing. They want to preserve that as parkland. So aside from low income or low affordable housing, the other thing is in Claremont, an affordable house is different than an affordable house in Pomona or El Monte or so Ontario even. The statistics are very different. And I don't think most people understand that. The other thing is when redevelopment agencies were dismantled, there was some money left over for some of the cities, and Claremont recently approved the transmission of, I don't know, over $1 million to a developer who is building housing for the homeless on a piece of property that Pilgrim Place is selling to this developer. But we'll have a manager, it will have social services, it will be 18 units, and it's kind of a different building, but it's going to be a really interesting facility and a way to get a handle on some, and that's on that property that used to where the Zetterberg House, I think it was called the Zetterberg House, used to be between.
Yeah, that's right. It was Zetterberg's.
Yeah, right. But anyway, that's where this 18 unit facility will be built, and it's going through the planning process right now.
It would do much better if it had a mix of folks.
Well, but there are at least 18 single people or families that do need housing and associated services, which apparently Tri-City will be handling. So.
Yeah, is that the one on, was it Foothill?
No, Harrison.
On Harrison, oh, the Harrison House, okay, right.
Near other institutional uses.
It's
Yeah.
over by the Christian Science Church.
Yeah, no, I
And
know.
the
what you mean.
Quakers.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, what you're looking at here in Claremont is a microcosm of a national problem, but we can't use that as a dodge not to address it ourselves here.
Nope.
And the other thing we have to worry about, by the way, is the enrollments in our schools are dropping dramatically. We used to get students from Pomona, but their enrollments are dropping. They're no longer allowing their students, except for rare cases, to come to Claremont. And even the LA school district is losing enrollment. And so there's some serious issues that have to do with education and how education is funded. That's also tied to all this, but let's not get into that right now.
That's why I take on those folks who are anti-immigrant and ask them, who the hell do they think they're going to pay their Social Security?
Point.
Karen, I noticed your hand is still up. Did you have more to say, or are you finished?
Wait, no, Chris,
Okay.
nope. Thank you.
Okay, so unless there are more announcements,
One announcement, Chris. Tomorrow is the State of the Union message. We hope it's a good one. Not that the State of Union is good, but the speech is good.
here.
And it better be good, because the latest poll I saw shows that Trump would win both California and New York.
Well, I'm shocked to hear that. I'll be curious to see that poll. So
Could I say something about that vacant lot next to the Quakers? That is owned by Pilgrim Place. The proposal is that they're going to sell it to a company called Jamboree that will put up low-income housing complete with counselors, so on with it. So that's the proposal.
okay, thank you, Barbara. What I wanted to say before we sign off, unless there are further announcements, is I'd like to encourage Karen and Joe and Ethan to stay on this call when everyone else signs off, because you're already here. That minimizes the chance of our getting lost in cyberspace. And if Sam seeks to join us, I'll be able to communicate with him and get him on the call as well. So I just ask if you would kindly just stay put. I have one announcement, and that is March 11th. Meg, who's on this call, will be presenting to the club on March 11th about the Wildlands Conservancy. So thank you for being here tonight, Meg, and we look forward to your presentation on March 11th.
Carol Lee, I asked, is Merrill our oldest vet, or the oldest war vet we got? We're going to feature in the parade.
We'll take any of you that want to join if you're a veteran.
If you're a geezer.
That's a very diplomatic answer there.
Okay, folks, I think that's it. I'm going to stop the recording at any event. Thank you, Merrill, for reminding me to do the recording.
Take care, everyone. Stay well.